We are live.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us around the globe, and welcome to this TADAT Coffee Chat. Over the last decade, the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool, TADAT, has supported the tax administrations in assessing and improving performance. Launched in 2014, TADAT introduced a standardized, evidence-based framework for evaluating tax administration systems around the world. In 10 years, it has become a global benchmark for transparency and reform planning, with more than 160 national assessments conducted across 112 countries. We are now moving to the third version of the TADAT Field Guide, which reflects lessons learned from years of implementation experience and responds to the evolving realities of modern tax administration. Today's session is titled Field Guide 2015, Unpacked, What's New and Why It Matters for Tax Administrations. My name is Paulo Paz. I will be moderating today's discussions. I am a senior economist in the Revenue Administration Division 2 of the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF. Before joining the IMF, I spent 27 years at the Brazilian Revenue Administration, working in both operational and headquarters roles. Since I joined the IMF, I have participated in several TADAT assessments and have had the opportunity to work with all the three versions of the TADAT Field Guide. I have the privilege of being joined by three distinguished panelists. First, we have Mr. Ainsley Hugh Powell, Commissioner General of Tax Administration Jamaica, TAG, who has served in the public sector with distinction for more than 30 years. He commenced working in the Income Tax Department of Jamaica in 1982 and is the latest successor, TAG, for which he was appointed Commissioner General in 2014. Mr. Powell has also represented Jamaica at several conferences and seminars locally, regionally, and internationally, and recently served as the Caribbean representative on the Executive Council of the Center of Inter-American Tax Administration, CIT. We are also joined by Ms. Samira Khan, a technical assistant advisor with the TADAT Secretariat and a South African national. She has over 25 years of professional experience across corporate sector, government, and international organizations, including 16 years in tax administration. Prior joining to the fund, Samira headed the Country Programs Unit at the African Tax Administration Forum, where she led the delivery of technical assistance to strengthen tax system in African countries. Before that, she worked at the South African Revenue Services, heading to the Tax and Customs Complex Risk and Analysis Unit. Samira has led and contributed to numerous technical assistance and TADAT missions. Completing the panel, we'll have the pleasure of receiving Mr. Paul Martins from Australia, who is a former staff member of the FAD, Revenue Administration Division 1, and was closely involved in the development of the new field guide. Mr. Martins has had a very long association with TADAT, as he was one of the members of the design team which led to the original field guide release in 2015. He was also involved in the 2019 review and now with this current 2025 versions release. Thank you to our panelists for joining us and sharing your perspective on the new field guide. Let's now turn to the discussion to explore what has changed, why these updates were introduced, and what they mean in practice for tax administration assessors. As we start, I invite the audience to think about what the Field Guide 25 means for your own context and to share your questions and comments using the Q&A. Our colleague Mauriel is ready to receive your questions through the chat. Please feel free to bring your insights. I want to start with a quick icebreaker question for Mr. Powell. Mr. Paul, given your experience in tax administration, please share with us one lesson that the world has taught you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, there are two things that come to mind quickly, and they are something that we experienced from the first assessment. And it's two phrases: the best practice and where's the evidence. And this I had pointed us to, carefully assess our strategies and to ensure that we have proper measurements, evaluation processes, and monitoring methodologies to ensure that we were on track with the whole question of how do we improve our administration within the POs that were established at the time.
All right, thank you very much. Samira, please, what's the piece of advice you have received that changed the way you approach your work in tax administration?
Thank you very much, Paul, for that question. It's a very interesting question. One piece of advice that really changed how I approach my work was being told to focus less on designing the perfect solution and more on what is actually doable in a given context. This advice made me rethink how to support tax administrations in implementing their reforms. In tax administration, it's often easy to come up with reforms that are technically sound and look great on paper. But over time, I learned that what really matters is whether those ideas can be implemented with the systems and the capacity and the constraints that a country is dealing with right now. That advice pushed me to listen more carefully, to ask better questions, and to pay closer attention to the local realities. So instead of jumping straight into ideal end states, I started thinking more about sequencing and what can realistically be achieved step by step. It also changed the way I think about progress. Rather than looking for big immediate transformations, I came to value incremental changes that may seem small, but are actually achievable, sustainable, and owned by the people implementing them. So over time, these small wins do add up, and they often have a much bigger impact.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Paul, please tell us one lesson that you have learned while undertaking capacity development work. You're mute, Paul.
I knew that was going to happen. So thank you, Paulo, and thank you everyone for attending this session. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, there's a few things here. Firstly, you really need to get a clear picture of the environment that the tax administration is working in. So not just its resources, but also the administration's capacity and willingness to change. This is certainly essential at the senior leadership level, but it's also greatly important for operational staff where a lot of capacity development work is actually done. It goes also without saying that you need to have a clear objective, and that objective needs to be commonly agreed by all parties. This obviously avoids the issues at the end where what has been achieved and delivered is different from what is thought to have been the objective. So that's very paramount importance. In addition, I always find that taking smaller steps that may involve a period of consolidation along the way is better than trying to take a big bang approach to change. Change takes time, especially in complex organizations like tax administration, where normal business operations need to carry on. So change should be undertaken as a continuum to avoid any progress being stalled. Thanks, Paulo.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to dive in the TADAT field guide and the changes. So I will start with Samira now. Samira, in what way does the 25 field guide better reflect modern tax administration priorities and evolving global practices? 4 minutes.
Paulo, let me start by saying this update is both timely and well aligned with the TADAT framework, which is designed to evolve through regular revisions so it stays relevant and fit for purpose. The revision of Field Guide 25 followed a genuinely inclusive consultation process with tax administration officials, IMF fiscal sector experts, capacity development providers, regional and international organizations, academia, experienced TADAT assessors, and members of the TADAT Technical Advisory Group. Additionally, various consultations and workshops were held where stakeholders shared their perspectives from different regions and operational contexts, ensuring that the emerging global practices are reflected in Field Guide 25. Field Guide 25 also draws on lessons learned from TADAT assessments, technical assistance missions, and training activities carried out since the previous Field Guide. Feedback was received from assessors and country authorities and was particularly important in highlighting where updates were needed to better reflect today's realities, such as digitalization, evolving compliance risks, and institutional challenges. Additionally, oversight by TADAT's governance body helped ensure that the updates respond to emerging priorities: technology, globalization, organizational performance, while still preserving the credibility and the neutrality of the diagnostic tool. The revised guide reflects modern tax administration trends, including digitization, data and analytics, compliance by design, tax fraud investigation, international taxation, organizational performance monitoring, and gender considerations. As a result, Field Guide 25 expands the framework from 32 to 35 indicators and from 56 to 61 measurement dimensions, while retaining the 9 performance outcome areas and the core design principles of the earlier editions. This balance, and this was strongly emphasized during our various consultations, ensures continuity and compatibility with past and future assessments, allowing countries to track reform progress over time while still benefiting from a more up-to-date diagnostic tool. So overall, Field Guide 25 in essence reflects tax administration's priorities, both in content and in process. It is the product of broad collaboration, lots of practical experience, and expert validation, making it technically stronger, more inclusive, and better aligned with current global practices, while still preserving what has always made TADAT a trusted diagnostic tool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo.
Let's move to Paul. Paul, the 25 Field Guide places greater emphasis on substance over form. What does this mean in practice when assessors evaluate evidence?
Thanks, Paulo. Look, can I start off by saying that traditionally form is what exists on paper or in some other electronic form. So things like policies, manuals, strategic papers or other documents, organizational charts, system screenshots, etc., etc. So there's lots of things that assessments teams often hear from administrations under an assessment process. Things like, we have a policy or a procedure on that. That is in our manual, for example, that's contained in our audit manual. We have prepared a paper on that. We have a list of service standards that we have published. Again, et cetera, a lot of these things are documents. And as part of any assessment, assessment teams rightly fill our evidence log with all manner of such materials. So if you look at any assessment, you will see an extensive list of documents contained in the evidence log that have been gathered by the assessment team throughout the course of the assessment. Importantly, substance, and this is the change with Field Guide 2025, substance is actually what happens. So, for example, how are those service standards used? How consistently are procedures applied or manuals followed? Are policies that are written adhered to within the administration by staff at the operational level? Are the papers that may have been written on risk areas, for example, electronic commerce, are they actually used in addressing risks in this particular area? So substance is all about what you do, or what the administration does with these documents that it has and are presented to the assessment team. Remember, TADAT has always been an evidence-based tool, okay? And assessors have always been expected to use judgment where reality, basically what they see and hear during an assessment, doesn't align neatly with what they're looking for and the scoring criteria in particular. So Field Guide 2025 provides for greater sharpening of this discipline. So you, as an assessor, give less credit for the existence of something, okay? Like a strategy document or a compliance risk paper. You acknowledge it, absolutely, but you want to give more credit and more recognition for demonstrated adoption of that document or that policy or that strategic paper. And then hopefully that aligns with the desired results that are being achieved by the use of that particular paper. So what you now find in Field Guide 2025 is emphasis of that link between the scoring criteria that is contained within the performance measurement framework. So that's your A, B, C, and D scoring criteria, and evidence that needs to be seen and collected that's listed in the assessor question guidance, which has been significantly updated for Field Guide 25. Look, there are a number of examples, and I haven't got a lot of time to go through them, but if you take a look at, for example, in POA 2, for dimension P5.1, where the process used to monitor and evaluate the impact of compliance risk mitigation activities. So although the scoring criteria remain largely the same, although we've added some specific time requirements here, the evidence requirement sees much more specificity when it comes to what assessors should be asking for and determining how this is used in the process. And then in this case, in the process of compliance risk mitigation activities. The other one that I wanted to give an example of was in POA 3 around supporting and facilitating compliance. And that is in dimension P392, the design of service channel performance standards and the extent of regular management reporting of results. This is a new dimension, but one of the criteria of the scoring specifically requires the administration to not only review performance in this area, but then to take remedial action where necessary. And this is an important change when it comes to substance. So the emphasis of substance over form is so important in Field Guide 2025 that you will now find a very comprehensive but succinct paragraph in chapter 2, one of the opening chapters of the Field Guide, the introduction to the Field Guide. And I strongly recommend you take a minute to read that particular paragraph. Thank you, Paulo.
Thank you very much. Tax Administration Jamaica is the second country to have 3 assessments, and is the first country to have 1 assessment using each field guide. So, Mr. Powell, Jamaica recently underwent the pilot assessment using the new field guide, and would like to share your first reaction on the changes and updates and their impact in improving tax administration efficiency and effectiveness.
Thanks for the question. We felt that the Field Guide 25 had a critical element in it that would suit us a lot. And that's it, that its focus is on digital transformation. And it provided us with an opportunity to assess our achievement to date in our digital journey. It also, in our mind, gave us a good opportunity to, look at our data analytics approach and the use of the big data in assessing performance. The fact that we see TADAT as more than a simple diagnostic tool, but rather one that helps to set clear goals. We have since then embarked on a review of some of our compliance strategies or approaches to see how we can improve on them. How can we improve on registration performance and register maintenance, which were things that would have come to fore as something for us to focus on. And so we have taken it right through the entire process, looking back at our strategies, looking back at our operational goals and outcomes, just to see if we were on target in our performance to meet the necessary outcome or results that we would enjoy seeing. It gave us a good opportunity to assess how TAJ is being operating within the context of best practice. How do you manage your arrears? How do you manage registration? And those were critical things that we felt that we needed to focus on, because the written or the expressed expectation and strategies were not necessarily, when measured under this 25, were yielding the kind of results that we would have wanted. And it's important that what you do or how we approach our activities are incongruent with what that measurement is expecting to find. And so where the changes came, we knew we had to make adjustments to how we were operating to match to what those requirements were. And we found it very useful because then we were now better able to see some of the gaps between what we stated that we were going to do and how we were going to do it, and what the results were along those rubrics. And it has guided us pretty well so far. And so we are basically heading into a new fiscal year, and our programs are now being adjusted to match with some of these expected parameters that we are going to be measuring ourselves on. So we have adopted it as an internal tool as to how we review and revise our approach to tax compliance. Are we getting to our goal of voluntary compliance? Would have been the first question. How do we deal with the different aspects of compliance within the whole compliance continuum? And as I said earlier, the tool has helped us a lot in guiding us in this direction.
All right, thank you very much. Let me go back to Samira. And Samira, tell us what's the most consequential changes introduced in the Field Guide 2025?
Thank you, Paulo, for that question, and very interesting to hear all the way the Field Guide has been used within the tax administration of Jamaica. So the most consequential changes in Field Guide 25 are about relevance, realism, and results. Paulo, let me clarify. These various changes that are reflected in Field Guide 25 bring the TADAT framework much closer to how tax administrations actually operate today, because it's more practical and more useful for reform. As Paul earlier spoke about substance over form, I think this is where the relevance and the practical part comes in. Firstly, there's a much stronger focus on digitalization, data, and analytics, especially in risk management and compliance and audit. Furthermore, Field Guide 25 reflects the reality that modern tax administrations rely on data systems, predictive tools, and digital processes. Second, Field Guide 25 places emphasis on compliance by design. Excuse me. What does this mean? It means supporting taxpayers and making it easier for them to comply in the first place, rather than just viewing compliance purely through an enforcement lens. This includes incorporating at the design stage proactive and preventative strategies into products and processes, such as online prompts for e-filing, automated pre-due date reminders, and pre-fill declarations, amongst others. It places emphasis on making it easier for taxpayers to comply and difficult not to. Thirdly, Field Guide 25 strengthens coverage of high risk and high impact areas. Countries have consistently flagged issues like tax fraud, arrears, and disputes as major constraints on performance. Field Guide 25 introduces clear and expanded treatment of tax fraud, arrears management, and dispute resolution, including new indicators and dimensions. Fourth, it shifts the conversation from plans to performance, from form to substance, as Paul has mentioned earlier. Field Guide 25 puts greater weight on implementation and outcomes, not just whether policies or plans exist on paper. Fifth, Field Guide 25 supports institutional strengthening. Countries will benefit from the stronger focus on organizational performance, governance, accountability, and human resources. Finally, what matters most about Field Guide 25 for countries is that it helps them to focus on real priorities: digital readiness, practical compliance, high-risk areas, and actual performance. Thank you, Paulo.
All right, thank you very much, Samira. Paul, please, how does the Field Guide 25 reduce subjectivity and increase precision and consistency in scoring compared with the previous field guides?
Thanks again, Paulo, for the question. It's a very important area. I want to start off by saying that TADAT has always acknowledged that real situations won't always align perfectly with, for example, the specific criteria in the performance measurement framework. So the scoring, what's an A, what's a B, what's a C? And these are outlined for each of the 61 dimensions in the field guide. This means, what does this mean? This means that assessors must apply judgment. And I'm sure many of you have been involved in discussions within assessment teams where the team needs to arrive at a consensus view when it comes to assigning a score in such circumstances. So that said, there is always a general requirement that assessors bring to the table extensive experience in tax administration. But this process can be exactly where a degree of subjectivity can creep in. So in an effort to increase precision and consistency, Field Guide 2025 attempts to fundamentally tighten the decision architecture around that judgment. There will always be room for consensus and discussion with experience being brought to the table, but Field Guide 25 is around trying to improve precision and consistency, particularly in the scoring. So in my previous question, and even Samira touched on it again when she just answered that, I've talked about substance over form, but there is definite connection with this question here as well. The existence of evidence alongside proof of its practical application or implementation provides certainty that something is being done, not just planned or being talked about. So what else is there in this quest for to reduce subjectivity and to increase precision and consistency? In the consultation process that was undertaken right at the start of the revision effort, there was quite a considerable amount of feedback that highlighted the need for better graduation between the scoring. So the criteria for an A, what's different for a B, and then what's different for a C. And as such, you will see quite a number of subtle but important changes in the scoring framework, so in the criteria. And you will see those throughout for each of the dimensions where this has been undertaken. In addition, there's been quite a number of cases where criteria were made clearer. And a few ways this was done. Some simple rewording of the previous criteria or use of more consistent terms. An example of this is the use of the word routine. We use it quite commonly or quite often within the field guide where there is a requirement for something to be done in a planned or scheduled activity that is performed regularly. Another example is better assignment of timeframes. And you will see that done quite specifically if you look at the dimension for 829.1 around the extent of tax administration input into government revenue forecasting. You will see specific timeframes for each of the 5 criteria that represent an A score. So that makes it clear is what is expected in that area. Clarification of the use of terms such as, for example, and that is within the performance measurement framework. So where you see, for example, it's just an example, it's not mandatory, but if you see something that's listed that means it is a mandatory requirement that must be there to achieve that particular score. And one final point I want to make on this effort to make things clearer is enhancements and additions to the glossary of terms. We made a decision early on that any term that needs to be defined should be defined within the glossary of terms. So you will see extensive additions, some 33 new definitions in the GOT, as well as a number of amended definitions to give that consistency and understanding amongst assessment teams. So I hope that gives you an insight into how we attempted to increase precision and consistency in the scoring process. Thank you, Paula.
All right, thank you very much. Now I want to go back to Mr. Powell, and with the experience of having completed 3 assessments for TAG, how does Jamaica use of results evolved over time?
Right. If you look back at what transpired in 2015, we had a score of about 55%, which we had as a baseline for ourselves. And we decided then, because we were going through transformation to a semi-autonomous organization. And so we used it as a basis to focus on our e-filing, strengthening our risk management framework, and looked at the separation of dispute resolution from audit in keeping with some best practices that existed. The fact that we had done that, right, we then had reached it. We did a 2021 review, and we saw improvement in 4 areas between 2021 and 2025, and we had an equivalent of 30.5% improvement in those areas. And we had 21 measurements remaining constant. And that gave us a score eventually of 65%. The third round, or the third assessment, we saw a slight reduction to 64, about 64%. And so we had looked back at all of that to see, well, then, okay, where did we falter on those? And we identified the areas. We did pretty well on the new areas of scoring. We got A's in at least 2 areas there. And we ended up with some C's and D's, which had prompted us to look back at what is it that we need to do to improve based on the new dimension. How are we going to improve on our performance, because I'm of the view, and the team is of the view, that embedded in the measurements and the dimension is an insight as to what are the things that you should be focusing on. So yes, you may have a target for a particular area, let us say improvement in registration. But if the sub-measurements are of such that you are not paying attention to them, then the high probability of not yielding the result is going to come to the fore. And so we have now look back at these dimensions, strip them apart, and as I said earlier, look at what is it that we are doing and how we are doing it to get the results that we need. So as was mentioned earlier by Paul, where does the rubber meet the road? My words. Hopefully I'm summarizing his insistence on how we need to look at these things. And did the rubber really meet the road? And in some instances, no. And we are now trying to make sure that that is properly aligned and we can move forward in getting the kind of results that we want.
Thank you very much. It is very inspiring the way TAG has embraced that methodology to improve products and services over time. I want to follow with Mr. Powell based on that. If you need to summarize Jamaica experience with the new field guide in one message to peer tax administrations, what would it be?
Sorry, I muted. Yes, the approach from us is that we have looked at the field guide as a good assessment of the environment and how it has evolved over time. And we also looked at it as a means of doing a 360 evaluation of our performance. The whole question of what is it that we are monitoring? What is it that we are measuring? How do we stack up against what would be considered the ideal in achieving the compliance outcomes and outputs that we are trying to achieve? And so it has set a tone for our strategic direction. We are now in our planning phase, and we use a 4-year rolling plan, and we are now trying to look now into 27, 28. And so we have dovetailed this in our assessment on certain key objectives that we would have had, working through over the years. It also allowed us to, clinically identify areas that we need to improve on. And how is it that we're going to get to the point where we need to be? And one area, for instance, is our registration. We have a very robust registration platform, but the question is, how do we keep it current, right? Are we in need of looking back at our structures to see if we have resources allocated to do this? And that kind of questioning of where we are is pointing us into the direction that we think we need to go. So it has allowed us to look forward to the result enhancement and how we're going to do the 4th assessment. Because we're looking forward to it, because the team is very much geared and raring to move back to where we were before and even better. So we're looking forward to a 4th assessment.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, Paul, please, if there is one mindset shift administration should make when approaching TADAT, what would it be, in your view?
Thanks, Paul. Look, as we all know, TADAT has evolved over the past 10 years. that's basically why we're now looking at a second revision of the field guide. What this means for tax administrations that they also need to evolve in their thinking about the TADAT process, which is why the connection to reform planning is a natural next step, following any assessment. So this emphasis on TADAT is not just a standalone assessment. There must be a connection to what happens next through the development of reform plans. And I think that's an important mindset shift for administrations to appreciate. I also think myself now, with the greater frequency of repeat assessments that administrations are going through, for example, every 3 or 5 years, we can now see how reform plans fit into that sequence. So an assessment is done, a reform plan is undertaken over a period of time, and then another assessment is undertaken to see how those reform plans have improved previous weaknesses that were identified. So I think that mindset shift is something that administrations should embrace and take on board when they're thinking about the TADAT product. Thank you, Paulo.
Thank you very much, Paul and Samira. Looking ahead, what is one of practical step tax administrators can take to get most value from the data assessments?
Thank you, Paulo. I think Paul has covered quite a bit on that already, and but I'll just add my view. In my view, one practical step for tax administrations is to formally embed the TADAT results into their reform governance and monitoring framework, rather than just treating the assessment as a standalone diagnostic. By translating the TADAT indicators and dimensions into a prioritized management-owned function or action and monitoring plan that is anchored in their existing or current governance structures. I think even Mr. Powell alluded to how they have used the TADAT in all these years to improve their processes and to monitor their progress. So just embedding it into their existing plans and making sure that it's owned, management owned, and it's monitored well, I think that would be my practical step that I would want to give as a parting remark. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Now we're moving to the final part, which is the Q&A. We have 3 questions that we want to answer at least. So I will ask my colleagues to give us a short answer, not more than 2 minutes each. The first one I will ask Samira and Mr. Powell to have their views. It's quite interesting. It's from Mr. Lamin Sao from Gambia Revenue Authority. Is about the negative human factors of digitalization in performance appraisal, as it legitimately impacts staff and performance. So Samira first and Mr. Powell, giving the perspective of TAG, please.
So in terms of digitization, it has become a core pillar of tax administration reform. And also in Field Guide 25, it is no longer treated just as a standalone initiative, but as a critical enabler, which is embedded across the entire compliance lifecycle. Importantly is the integration of these digital tools into our day-to-day operational processes within the tax administration, particularly through the enhanced data collection, advanced data analytics, and predictive risk-based approaches. Therefore, I don't know if it's a negative connotation, but I would say the effective use of these tools requires new and evolving skill sets, which are addressed under POA 2, human capital risks. And this reinforces the significance of capital risk management including the upskilling and reskilling of existing staff, looking at the labor market and scanning and using the strategic use of outsourcing where appropriate, targeted recruitment of high caliber talent and retention of key personnel. So there is an interdependence between digitization and people. And this is further underscored by the Field Guide 25 expanded focus on organizational performance management. Because as tax administrations increasingly adopt sophisticated technologies such as data analytics platforms and automated risk engines, there is a growing imperative to invest in workforce capabilities. And this includes strengthening analytical and digital skills, as well as enhancing change management capacity to ensure that these technological advances translate into sustained improvements in organizational performance. I'll stop there.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Powell. Please, how do you see in TAG moving a strong digitalization reform in TAG, human impacts factors in performance appraisal over time?
If we're looking at the human element in the entire process or the journey of digitalization, we have to look at it in two contexts. We have to look at the stakeholders, public take-up. And as far as the take-up of the public is concerned, you have to factor in the fact that there are proven behavioral aspects that you must take on board, and that is your early innovators will always try these things once you put them on. And then the challenge now is when you reach that chasm of low take-up, how do you move it back on track? And the challenge of the education and support to the public becomes, there's always the option that you could, make it compulsory and insist, but it still doesn't necessarily augur well for your group of persons who want to comply, but having a challenge in compliance because they need that extra support, they're that extra push and guidance to, utilize what would be in place. On the internal side, so far we are seeing a pretty good, support from team members. We make sure that we spend a lot of time in training for them to adopt. And the question that though will apply, which is outside of the human capital side, but how do we get our legacy systems and our modern systems to integrate and drive this process? There are some, nuances that you have to. So like the publication and everything on the website. Our website needs to be, significantly on. And we're in that process, but we're in a procurement mode. So that has proved to be a little bit of a challenge. We are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with that. But, we'll have to just push on and make sure that we come on stream early with the new platform that will allow easier publication. The next challenge is how do you get persons to be aware of what these changes are and what, and having a sort of discussion on the information. We have, certain key stakeholder organizations that makes that a little bit easier. So, like for instance, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, the Bar Association, etc. We can have, that kind of drive. On our side, we are seeing some push coming from the public interest. Ask when are we going to go digital with certain things? There's that demand. And so the challenge now is how do we keep that balance between our targets and their expectations. But overall, I think these are challenges that can be managed. Of course, there will be some difficulties in doing it, but I think we can manage it once, we can get the team adjusted around all these demands, we can focus on how do we get to that point.
Thank you very much, very clear. Thank you, Samir, as well. So, Paul, in 1 minute, please. The second question from Mr. Lemon South from Gambia Revenue Authority is how to know the uncollectible tax or not collected tax to help ensure efficiency and effective resource mobilization for optimal collection of taxes.
Thanks, Paulo. I won't do it justice in a minute, but I'll give it a go. Look, this question, great question, covers at least 4 POAs, looking at effective risk management around compliance risk, which feeds into this particular topic. POA 5 around the payment of taxes. As you've probably already seen, now we look at not only the numbers, the hard numbers, but we look at the process of arrears enforcement action through a new indicator, P519. In POA 6, it even touches there where we're looking at tax gap, what is the impact of the tax gap, and that's an important process that needs to take place in that particular area around, non-collected tax. And lastly, I think the new change with POA 8, where we've introduced organisational performance management, is important because the efficient and effective allocation of resources comes into play in this particular indicator, where the onus is on the senior leadership team to ensure that resources are aligned for the optimum collection of tax. So I think there are a number of factors in play that address this particular concern that's being presented. So thank you, Paulo.
Thank you very much, Paul. Final question that you answer is from Omar Awashawi from Oman Tax Authority. Is from a TADAT perspective, what practical indicators best reflect high-quality tax audit within tax administration? And our colleague John Middleton, who is online and also worked with us in the review of the field guide, gave a very clear answer. I just want to complement saying that if you're talking about key performance outcomes, indicators, you have in POA 621 Dimension 4 a comprehensive list of indicators to measure, and the new field guide brought exactly what John said, which is the requirement to measure the impact on identified risks of past audits and also the impact of audit programs in the level of taxpayer compliance, meaning we're not looking at outcomes or at outputs of audit, but outcomes. We want to have higher level of tax compliance. It is the ultimate goal, all right? So my comment to Omar is please take a look in the POA 621 Dimension 4. What's new is in blue and reflects exactly what you're mentioning. With that, thank you very much. We are a bit over time. So I just want to thank you, our panelists, for your insightful and thought-provoking contributions. The discussion made clear that technology, IT, data analytics are among the most consequential advances now. And the focus on digital tools and this advanced analytics empowers tax administration to make more informed and strategic decisions. In particular, the opportunity to benefit from the data assessments using the new field guide as a practical, forward-looking instrument stood out. By anchoring reforms in the data assessments and medium-term reforms derived from these assessments, what we call post-TADAT missions, countries gain a powerful pathway to translate diagnostic findings in tangible progress. And these advancements are not only timely but essential, enabling tax administration to adapt with confidence and agility and an increasingly complex and evolving environment. Once again, thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your expertise and highlighting how TADAT can continue to serve as a catalyst for meaningful reforms. And thank you